There's a gas station just off Highway 27 that truckers know well. A place they stop because it's the only one for miles. It's small, run down, with flickering neon lights that barely make a dent in the thick black sky. People say the station has been there forever, maybe as long as the highway itself, and it's a place locals tend to avoid, especially at night. One cold October evening, a young man named Tyler was driving through the area. His car's gas gauge dipped lower and lower until the light blinked, and he pulled into the gas station as the only other choice would be to risk running out of gas in the middle of nowhere. The station was empty except for an old, rusty pickup parked at the far end. Tyler glanced at it as he got out, feeling a strange unease when he noticed that the windows were covered with dust, like it hadn't moved in years. The gas pump was ancient, and Tyler struggled to get it working. He fumbled with his wallet, paid, and began filling up. The chilly night air settled around him, and every little sound seemed louder than usual. The click of the pump, the hum of a lone streetlight, and the creak of the gas station's sign swinging in the wind. As he waited, Tyler caught a movement out of the corner of his eye. He turned, expecting to see another customer, but saw no one. The windows of the gas station store were dark, even though he could have sworn he'd seen someone's shadow move inside. He decided it was nothing, just nerves from the long drive. But as he turned back to the pump, he felt it again, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. The feeling grew stronger, and finally, he couldn't ignore it. Tyler glanced around and then looked toward the old pickup truck. His heart skipped when he realized there was someone inside. An old man, gray-haired and wearing a faded flannel shirt, sat in the driver's seat, staring at him with cold, unblinking eyes. It was as if the man had been there the whole time, hidden behind the dust-covered glass, just watching. The sight of the man gave Tyler chills. There was something not right about him, something in his expression that felt too intense, too empty. Tyler finished pumping the gas as quickly as he could, not taking his eyes off the man. He was about to get back into his car when he heard a faint sound, barely audible over the wind. It was a whisper, dry and cracked, like the voice hadn't been used in ages. "Help me." Tyler froze. He looked back at the truck, but the old man's mouth hadn't moved. And yet he'd heard it, as clear as anything. "Help me," the voice whispered again, and this time Tyler could tell it wasn't coming from the man in the truck. A cold shiver ran down his spine, and he took a step back. Suddenly, the headlights of his car flickered, casting an eerie glow over the gas station. The light caught the man's face in the truck, and Tyler gasped. The man's eyes were wide open, but they were glassy, unfocused. He wasn't blinking, wasn't breathing. In that instant, Tyler realized that the man wasn't watching him at all. The man was dead. Panicked, Tyler stumbled backward, his mind racing. That truck, had it been here all along, parked at the edge of the lot, holding its silent, rotting passenger? He looked back at the store, desperate to find someone, anyone who could explain what was happening. And that's when he saw her. A woman in a long coat stood by the gas station door, half hidden in shadows. Her face was pale, her eyes dark, and she looked hollow. She raised a hand and pointed at Tyler, her mouth opening in a silent scream. The woman's face twisted with a look of desperation and fear, and Tyler felt that same chilling whisper echoing in his mind, louder now. "Help me. Please, help me." Her eyes burned with an intensity that made Tyler's skin crawl. He could feel her fear, her anger, and something else, something darker. Terrified, Tyler fumbled for his keys and jumped into his car. He slammed the door and turned the ignition, his heart pounding as he glanced back at the pickup truck. But this time, the old man wasn't alone. Another figure sat in the passenger seat, a woman with hollow eyes staring straight at him. It was the same woman from the store, but now her face was twisted, almost skeletal, with empty black sockets where her eyes should be. Her mouth opened, and that same whisper filled his mind, only now it was screaming. "Help me!" With a scream of his own, Tyler tore out of the gas station, tires screeching as he sped down the dark, empty highway. He didn't look back, didn't dare glance in his rearview mirror, afraid of what he might see. The next morning, Tyler drove into the nearest town, still shaken, and immediately told the local police what he'd seen. The officer on duty listened with a frown, shaking his head as if this was a story he'd heard before. Tyler insisted, describing the old man, the woman, the pickup truck with the dusty windows, and the officer finally sighed and asked him to follow. They drove back to the gas station together, and as they pulled up, Tyler's heart sank. The pickup truck was gone, the gas station looking as abandoned as it had before. The officer gave Tyler a sad look and explained that years ago, a couple had gone missing on this highway. Their last known stop had been at this very gas station. Some said the husband died of a heart attack, and the wife, trapped in the truck with her husband's body, had eventually died of thirst or exposure, calling for help that never came. Sometimes drivers reported strange sightings, the officer said. An old truck with ghostly figures inside, a whisper in the wind. Tyler stared at the empty lot, feeling a chill settle in his bones. As he turned to leave, he caught a glimpse of something in the rearview mirror. For just a moment, he saw the truck again, parked at the edge of the lot. The old man and the woman stared back at him, silent and still, before they faded back into the shadows, leaving Tyler with a feeling he'd never forget. The desperate, lingering cry for help that had come far too late. One hot summer night, as Kaylee drove through a lonely stretch of highway, she noticed a car pulled over on the side of the road. Its emergency lights blinked, illuminating a young woman standing by it, waving desperately for help. Reluctantly, Kaylee slowed down. She'd heard countless stories about highway hitchhikers, scams, and dangerous encounters, but something about the girl seemed genuinely desperate. As she pulled up beside the stranded woman, she rolled down her window slightly, just enough to speak. "Do you need help?" Kaylee asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The girl nodded frantically, her face pale and filled with terror. "My car broke down and my phone's dead," she said, glancing nervously over her shoulder toward the dark, empty field stretching out beside the road. "Please, can you give me a ride to the next town? I don't feel safe out here." Against her better judgment, Kaylee unlocked the passenger door. The girl climbed in, looking around nervously as she settled into the seat. "What's your name?" Kaylee asked, trying to break the uneasy silence. "Anna," the girl replied, glancing back at the road, as if expecting someone or something to appear. They drove in silence for a few miles, and Kaylee couldn't shake the uneasy feeling creeping up her spine. Anna sat rigid, her hands clenched in her lap, eyes darting to the side mirrors every few seconds. Finally, Kaylee couldn't hold back her curiosity. "So, what happened back there?" It looked like you were in some kind of trouble." Anna's hands shook as she whispered, I think someone was following me." Her voice was barely audible over the hum of the engine. "I noticed a car behind me close, flashing its lights. Then it disappeared, but I just had this feeling, like someone was watching me right there, waiting." Kaylee's unease deepened. "Did you see who it was?" "No," Anna said, her eyes widening. "But I think they're still out here, somewhere close by, waiting." As they neared the next town, Kaylee's headlights illuminated an old, rusted sign for a gas station up ahead. The place looked deserted, but it was a short distance from the main road, and she figured they could at least stop to make a call for help. She pulled off and parked under the flickering lights, but as soon as she cut the engine, a wave of silence washed over them. No wind, no crickets, just the oppressive quiet of the empty lot. "I'll go see if anyone's inside," Kaylee said, trying to mask the anxiety in her voice. Anna shook her head sharply. "No, don't go. Don't leave me alone here. Please," she pleaded, clutching Kaylee's arm with an iron grip. Her eyes looked frantic, and Kaylee felt a pang of fear spread through her chest. Okay, Kaylee said, pulling her arm free but staying in the car. "Let's just sit tight." They waited, watching the empty station, each of them lost in their own anxious thoughts. Kaylee kept glancing in her mirrors, expecting to see headlights approaching, the mysterious car Anna had mentioned. But the night remained eerily still. After several tense minutes, Anna's face drained of color. Her gaze fixed on something behind Kaylee. Kaylee slowly turned, looking in the rearview mirror, but saw nothing. She turned back to Anna, but Anna's expression had shifted. The fear was gone, replaced by something unsettling. "Thank you for the ride, Kaylee," Anna said softly. Kaylee's blood ran cold. She had never told the girl her name. Every nerve in her body screamed to run, to get out of the car, but she was frozen in place. "How did you?" Kaylee stammered, her voice barely a whisper. Anna's eyes turned dark, her face paling to an ashen hue. "I never really needed a ride." "Kaylee," she whispered, her voice hollow and cold. "I just needed someone to remember me." In an instant, Anna faded from sight, leaving nothing behind but the faint scent of old perfume. Kaylee's car was empty, and in the dim light of the gas station, she caught a glimpse of her rearview mirror, where a message had been traced in the dust. "Thank you for helping me." Shaken to her core, Kaylee sped away, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. She kept glancing in her mirrors, certain she'd see Anna's face again, but there was only darkness. Later, when she told her story to the local police, one of the officers listened carefully, his face grim. "That gas station," he said slowly, "is where Anna Collins went missing 5 years ago. Her car was found abandoned by the highway, but no one ever saw her again." Kaylee left the police station feeling haunted, her mind replaying Anna's last words in the car. To this day, she avoids that highway at night, but she knows she'll never forget the ghostly plea of a girl who just wanted to be remembered. Daniel was a night shift janitor at the Riverbend Library, a grand but aging building with tall, Gothic architecture and narrow hallways. Most of the town avoided the library after dark, citing strange noises and an unsettling feeling that grew stronger as the evening went on. Daniel had heard the stories of strange apparitions and whispered voices, but he needed the job. Besides, he was a skeptic at heart and dismissed the tales as just the overactive imaginations of the town's older residents. One rainy night, he was polishing the reading room tables when he heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping, echoing from somewhere within the library's endless rows of shelves. Daniel stopped his work and looked around, listening intently. The building was supposed to be empty, and his footsteps were usually the only sounds in the silent space. He shrugged it off as old pipes, or maybe the wind rattling one of the high, dusty windows. But as he returned to cleaning, the tapping grew louder, more insistent. Curiosity getting the better of him, Daniel set down his mop and followed the sound deeper into the library. The tapping led him through aisles of towering bookshelves and past the dimly lit study rooms. As he rounded a corner, he stopped dead in his tracks, his heart pounding. There, at the end of the aisle, stood a tall, shadowy figure. It was barely visible, half hidden in the shadows, but Daniel could make out its unnaturally long limbs and an unsettlingly hunched posture. Its head was tilted as if listening, its face obscured in darkness. He blinked, and in that split second, the figure vanished, leaving the aisle empty. Daniel shook his head, convincing himself that it had to be a trick of the light, a shadow cast by one of the flickering lamps. But as he turned to leave, he heard it again, the tapping, this time coming from directly behind him. He spun around, but no one was there. The library felt colder, and he could feel the hairs on the back of his neck standing up. The silence was so thick it felt alive, as though the air itself was holding its breath. Trying to shake off the feeling, Daniel headed back toward the front desk, intending to grab his things and leave early for the night. But as he turned the corner into the main hall, he froze. All along the walls, words had appeared, scratched into the plaster in jagged, hurried strokes. The messages twisted and overlapped, filling every inch of wall space. Daniel's eyes scanned the phrases. "Can you hear me? Help me. It's not safe here." He backed away, horrified, and stumbled as his foot hit something solid. Looking down, he saw a book lying open on the floor, its pages yellowed and brittle. The title had been scratched out, and instead, a message was scrawled across the open pages. "Run." Daniel didn't need to be told twice. He bolted for the door, heart pounding in his chest, desperate to escape the eerie silence and the messages carved into the walls. But just as he reached for the handle, he felt something cold grip his wrist, stopping him in his tracks. He looked down, and though no hand was visible, he could feel the iron-like pressure on his arm, pinning him in place. The tapping returned, echoing from somewhere in the library, growing louder, faster, more frenzied. He pulled at his arm, but the invisible force held him tight. Then, slowly, a voice drifted through the silence as if whisperingly into his ear. It was soft, breathy, and filled with desperation. "Don't leave me here. You can't leave me here." In sheer terror, Daniel yanked his arm free, tearing himself from the unseen grip and stumbling backward. He ran out the front door, not stopping until he reached his car, where he fumbled with his keys and sped away from the library as fast as he could. The next morning, he went to the library's head custodian and quit his job, explaining only that he couldn't handle the night shift anymore. The custodian nodded knowingly and said, "Not the first one to walk out after dark. People say there was a man who worked here 100 years ago, a clerk who stayed late and somehow never left. They say he still wanders the library at night, looking for a way out, hoping someone will stay with him. Daniel didn't wait to hear any more. He turned and walked out, vowing never to return. But some nights when he was alone in his apartment, he would hear a soft, rhythmic tapping, a sound that seemed to echo through the walls, filling his ears with that same desperate whisper he'd heard that night. "Don't leave me here.